There's no voice more appropriate than Marc Short, the Republican strategist, joins us right now. Former White House Director of Legislative Affairs and former Chief of Staff Vice President Mike Pence. Marc, I hope your year is going well. Welcome back.
Happy New Year. Thanks for having me back.
On Bloomberg, of course. Your thoughts on the involvement of Congress here, the appetite that they might have, seems similar to the appetite we're told some of these oil executives might have of investing in this project.
I can't imagine there'd be much interest in Congress to use taxpayer dollars to help subsidize this. But I'm not so convinced that there won't be executive opportunities for subsidization. When I hear the commentary from Bergram that's not off the table, I wouldn't necessarily say it's off the table until the president says it's off the table. Okay. And I think everything you laid out is exactly right. That these executives are going to want to know there's some sort of assurance of stability in the country before making massive investments at shareholder risk. They need to know that risk is somewhat mediated. But I think that there's, for multiple of these companies, significant amounts of dollars the World Bank has ruled is owed to them. And I think the president can have a way of ensuring they get those resources if they make commitments to invest.
Okay, interesting. How's this meeting going to go when you're in the room with Donald Trump? You've been in a lot of meetings with this president. Door closes, guys like me are thrown out of the room. Is there an agenda that's set, or are we just kind of riffing because they're people who know each other and have relationships?
I think there's probably an agenda that Secretary Wright, Secretary Bergram have of what's the path forward. I think that the president, though, prefers to have these meetings more relationship-oriented. Right. And so they'll be needing to keep the agenda on track. Okay. But I think he's going to take it where he kind of
makes
feels.
It hard to say no that way, doesn't it?
But I also think that it would be incredibly unlikely to me that cameras are not brought into this meeting.
How about
and
that?
So I think you'll get to see it for yourself.
You'll
get to see it for yourself in a little bit, because the president relishes the optics of him being surrounded by some of the largest CEOs of companies that are global companies. And so it's hard for me to think that there won't be visual. You'll get to see the meeting yourself.
Yeah, well, but mark that down, producer James. We might have a pool spray to be covering later on here on Balance of Power. Interesting watching the stocks. ExxonMobil's up a little bit. Chevron's up about 1.5%. Refiners like Valero are lower. How should investors be thinking about this with the president once again kind of emerging as the chairman of the board?
Well, again, I think there's a couple of things. For Chevron, for Exxon, there are dollars significant, particularly for Chevron and ConocoPhillips, billions of dollars the World Bank has said that you are owed because Venezuela seized these assets from you. Right. For Exxon, it's a small amount, but it's still over $1 billion. Yeah. So there's a lot of dollars that I would imagine that there's a higher prospect that gets paid out. So probably for shareholders, there's a notion that, hey, this is going to make a significant impact on their balance sheets. I think that for the president, he has got a continued commitment to trying to lower gas prices, and that's to his credit. I mean, oil prices are down significantly. Energy prices are down significantly since he came in. I think that you still have other prices that are much higher because of his trade agenda. But he wants, I think, to offset the trade agenda by continuing to lower energy prices as much as he can. But obviously, as you know, by the time you get any of this oil out of the ground onto the marketplace, it's going to be many years.
Yes, right. So we're going to be talking with the Energy Secretary a little bit later on today at the conclusion of this meeting. Should we expect takeaways today, or is this the start of a longer conversation?
I would imagine there'll be some takeaways about what a path could look like. I don't think there'll be something finalized today, but I would imagine Chris can give you a sense of here was the conversation, here's the commitment that these CEOs have, and here's what the president offered them.
Got it. Going to keep your former legislative affairs hat on here, because yesterday was a doozy on Capitol Hill, and I'm really deeply curious to hear your thoughts. We went up to the Capitol for the vote on ACA subsidies and talked to two Republicans who crossed over. Republican Nick LaLota, the congressman from Long Island, from New York, and Republican Ryan McKenzie of Pennsylvania. In that order, listen to what they told us after voting yes.
A lot of our constituents rely on these subsidies, and doing nothing we knew was not an option. So we wanted to, and we explored several different options before Christmas. Unfortunately, a number of them were blocked by our Rules Committee, and this was the only option available to us, was to pass this 3-year extension, which we understand is dead in arrival in the Senate.
Since running for office in 2024 on the campaign trail, the biggest issue that we heard about was affordability and cost of living issues, and so that has not changed. After 4 years years of Bidenflation, people were suffering. Our efforts in the House are keeping this conversation alive, and what is going on in the Senate is they are looking at plans very similar to what we had already proposed here in the House, and so hopefully we'll get to one of those resolutions.
Really interesting to hear from both of them following that vote. 17 Republicans crossed over on the ACA. We'll see where that goes. I realize that's its own story. But 5 Republican senators voted for a War Powers Act. The president shamed them on social media. What's going on here?
Well, let's try and break them apart, because I think they are two separate issues. I think that on Obamacare and government-run health care, Democrats 15 years ago promised that it would lower costs and promised you like your doctor, you keep them. There's a lot of broken promises. Healthcare costs are astronomical today. The challenge for Republicans is they have not put forward an alternative. And so now you're in a box where Democrats say we want to continue these subsidies. Cost of living is higher. Affordability prices is higher. And so for a lot of Republicans in swing districts, looking at the midterms, they want to be on record voting for things that keep prices down, even if it's counterintuitive. The Republicans would be voting to continue government-run health care and these subsidies. So that's the dilemma for many of these Republicans. And I think it's added because the president wants the subsidies extended. He's concerned about the affordability issue. And so that's why you saw in his remarks earlier this week, something that's gotten less coverage, but the president saying to House Republicans, you need to have greater flexibility on the government taxpayers funding abortion. It was a remarkable statement for a Republican president to say. And I think what he's basically saying is he knows that's a tripwire for a lot of Republicans, and he's asking them to go along, in essence, with this. So I don't think this bill is going to pass in the Senate, but I do think what you're going to see is that the Senate is going to use that to map another pathway forward. And I think ultimately you're going to see these subsidies extended.
Is that the Moreno bill?
I think that's terrible policy. Policy, but I think politically, I think that's where we're going to end up.
Because these two guys want to get reelected probably more than they're worried about being yelled at by Donald Trump.
Again, I think there are better ways the Republicans should be talking about, here's what's happened since we passed Obamacare. Here's the cost of how much health care has increased, and here's what we're going to have as an alternative. But they're not, in an absence of that, they're going to be forced to vote on whether you just continue the subsidies. I think a lot will.
Interesting.
On the War Powers Act, I think it's a totally separate argument. What I don't understand is, I think, frankly, with all the news that's out there, it would have gotten less attention except for the president attacking those 5. Like, why he chose to do that? It is more of a posture vote that's really not impinging what he's doing in the moment. And so I think a wiser course would be to ignore it from his position. But to go after those 5 only elevates it into the national conversation.
We're just showing the 5 on the screen if you're with us on Bloomberg TV. That said, would it have been your job in the first administration to get on the phone and rap knuckles on a day like that? How does beyond going on Truth Social, how does the White House handle a jailbreak?
Well, it is Legislative Affairs Director's job to make sure they're aware of where votes are and who's going where. There's probably less influence you have as a staffer.
I see.
But by alerting the president can make calls to these people and say, hey, look, I don't want to see your vote going against me on this. So there's ways to get ahead of it that I don't know if it happened or not. But I think that, look, this president is usually more engaged than most presidents. I remember when I came into the role, I actually met with my predecessor who had served in the Obama administration, and she gave me wonderful advice about doing the job. But it was remarkably different because I think Obama was gifted in so many ways, but he got kind of detached from Congress. This president has always been very engaged with members. And so it's not as if there's a lack of communication, and it's probably something that you should have the communication before as opposed to tweeting about after.
Great. Where's your gut on government funding? It looks like we might have a couple of minibuses, maybe a short-term CR. You're not worried about a shutdown, are you?
I think it's very unlikely we'll have another shutdown. I think there's been progress on the appropriations front, and I think that, candidly, for Democrats, they got everything they wanted out of the last shutdown, which I think has been counter the way these things are usually work.
That's quite a statement, considering there's no subsidies to show for it.
Well, but politically,
they got it back
politically,
politically,
they gained a lot, and I still think they're going to get their subsidies at the end of the day. And I think traditionally, when Republicans have shut down the government and saying we're going to leverage that for some other policy, we've always lost. And it seems, I think, the Democrats got the leverage and the political win, too.
As Donald Trump's former legislative affairs director, what do you think when you hear people say that he's the actual Speaker of the House?
Well,
I'm sure you see it more nuanced than that, but is there some truth to it?
There is. I think what the president has been very effective at is, whether you like it or you don't, he's been far more willing to engage in primaries in a way that strikes fear amongst House Republicans. And so they're more willing to walk in lockstep. Traditionally, a Republican or Democrat president's looked at like, I'm not going to criticize my own team because the downside is you could get replaced by a Democrat. But this president's looked at it to say, I'm going to keep my team in step by them understanding I'd be willing to primary them. And so he's had far more influence as a president over this Congress than traditionally a president does over his own team.
Maybe you set the new model. Marc, it's great to see you. We appreciate the insights as always.
Thanks a lot for having me.